The storm that brought him home. The canvas tore with a sound like a scream. Eliza Moore threw her body across her three children as the tent collapsed around them, rain flooding the dirt beneath their blankets. Thunder cracked so close it shook her bones. Her youngest son whimpered against her chest. She had nothing left, no husband, no home, no money, no plan. Just her arms around her babies and a prayer that the storm wouldn't take them too. Then through the sheets of rain, she saw him. A lone rider who should have kept going but didn't. A stranger who would change everything. Welcome to this story of survival, second chances, and the kind of love that's built in the wreckage of loss. If this story moves you, please hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these tales travel. Now, let's begin. The Wyoming plains had no mercy in late summer. Eliza Moore knew that now, though the knowing came too late to save her. She crouched in what remained of her tent, one hand braced against the sagging canvas, the other wrapped tight around her daughter's trembling shoulders. The wind howled like something living and hungry, tearing at the stakes she'd driven into the hard ground 3 days ago. 3 days. That's how long she'd been camped on the edge of nowhere, watching the distant outline of the Hayes Ranch buildings and trying to summon the courage to approach. 3 days of rationing the last of their cornmeal, of telling her children that things would get better soon, of lying to herself that she had any idea what to do next. "Mama, I'm scared." That was Thomas, her middle child, barely 7 years old. His voice cut through the roar of the storm. "I know, sweetheart. Just stay close to your sister." Sarah, at 9, was doing her best to comfort 5-year-old James, who had his face buried in her shoulder, sobbing with the kind of fear that came from understanding, even at his age, that they were alone in a world that didn't care whether they lived or died. The tent gave another violent shudder. One of the corner stakes ripped free, and suddenly half the canvas was flapping wild in the wind, rain pouring in sideways. Eliza lunged for the loose fabric, but it whipped out of her grasp. Water soaked through her worn calico dress in seconds. "Mama!" Sarah's scream barely reached her over the thunder. "Get under the wagon!" Eliza shouted, though she knew the wagon offered little protection. It was more skeleton than shelter now, just the frame and 2 wheels after she'd sold everything else for food money that had run out 4 days ago. She herded her children toward it, slipping in the mud, her boots, Aaron's old boots, too big for her feet, sucking at the ground with every step. They huddled beneath the wagon bed, and Eliza wrapped herself around all 3 of them, trying to be roof and walls and warmth all at once. This was not how it was supposed to be. 2 months ago, she'd had a home, small, drafty, but theirs. Aaron had built it with his own hands before he died, and she'd kept it going for 2 years after, taking in washing and mending, growing what vegetables she could in the rocky soil. It wasn't prosperity, but it was survival. Then the landlord sold the property. The new owner wanted the land cleared for cattle. She'd had 30 days to leave, 30 days to figure out where a widow with 3 children and no family could possibly go. She'd heard about opportunities out west, about towns desperate for laundresses and cooks, about ranches that sometimes hired women for household work. So she'd sold everything she couldn't carry, bought passage on a freight wagon heading toward the Montana Territory, and told herself she was brave. But the freight wagon had left them at a crossroads 40 miles back, the driver unwilling to take them farther without more money. She'd spent the last of her coins on flour and beans, hitched their own small wagon to the old mare, and started following what the driver said was the road to Riverside, the nearest town. The mare had gone lame 2 days into the journey. Eliza had no money for a farrier, no knowledge of how to treat the injury herself. She'd left the animal at a homestead with a kind-faced woman who'd promised to care for her, and continued on foot pulling the wagon herself. Then the wheel broke. Then the axle cracked. Then she'd realized they were lost. She'd made camp where the wagon finally gave out, on a rise with a view of distant ranch buildings. Tomorrow, she'd told herself. Tomorrow she'd walk to that ranch and beg for work. She was good with her hands. She could clean, cook, mend. Surely someone needed help. But tomorrow had brought the storm. Lightning split the sky, so bright it burned through her closed eyelids. Thunder followed instantly, a crack so loud it felt like the earth itself breaking open. James screamed. Sarah started praying, words tumbling out in a breathless rush. Thomas just shook, his small body rigid against Eliza's side. It's all right, she said, knowing it wasn't, hating the lie even as it left her mouth. The storm will pass. But would they? The wind was getting worse, strong enough now to rock the wagon. Rain came down in sheets so thick she couldn't see past her own hands. The temperature had dropped, and she could feel her children shivering violently against her, their clothes as soaked as her own. If they stayed here, they would freeze. If they ran, they would be struck by lightning or blown off their feet. There was nowhere to go, nothing to do but hold on and pray the dawn would find them still breathing. She thought of Aaron then, which she tried not to do because it hurt too much. Aaron would have known what to do. Aaron would have built a shelter that could weather this. Aaron would have seen the storm coming and gotten them to safety. But Aaron was 3 years in the ground, and she was alone. The wagon lurched. For one horrible moment, Eliza thought it might tip over on top of them. She pulled her children tighter, tucking their heads down, and started singing, an old hymn her mother had taught her, one about peace and safety and shelter from the storm. Her voice was shaking too hard to carry the tune properly, but Sarah joined in, then Thomas. Even little James hummed along, his sobs quieting to hiccups. That's when she heard it. Hoofbeats. At first she thought she'd imagined it, the sound lost in the chaos of wind and rain. But then it came again, closer, deliberate. Someone was riding toward them. Through this. She peered out from under the wagon, squinting against the rain. A shape emerged from the gray curtain of the storm, a man on horseback, hunched against the wind but moving with purpose. He wore a wide-brimmed hat pulled low and a heavy coat that streamed water. As he drew closer, she could make out his face, weathered, maybe 40, with the kind of lines that came from years of hard work and sun. He reined in his horse a few yards away and dismounted, moving with the calm efficiency of someone who'd been through worse storms than this. When he approached the wagon, he crouched down so he could see them clearly. "Ma'am?" His voice was deep, steady, cutting through the noise without being loud. "You can't stay out here. This storm's going to get worse before it gets better." Eliza stared at him, too shocked to respond. Who was this man? Why was he here? "I have a cabin about a quarter-mile north," he continued, rain dripping off the brim of his hat. "Solid roof, warm stove. You and your children need to come with me now." It took her a moment to find her voice. I don't know you." "Name's Caleb Hayes. I'm foreman at the Hayes Ranch." He gestured toward the building she'd been watching for days. "Saw your tent from the upper pasture this morning. Meant to ride out and check on you after my work was done, but then the storm hit." His eyes, a clear gray even in the dim light, held steady on hers. "Ma'am, I'm not asking you to trust me with anything but your lives for one night. But I am asking. Those children are half frozen already." Eliza looked down at Sarah, Thomas, James, their lips blue, their small bodies shaking so hard they could barely breathe. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. "All right," she said. Caleb nodded once and stood. "I'll get the children on my horse first. Can you walk?" "Yes." He was gentle with them, lifting James first and settling him in the saddle, then helping Sarah and Thomas up behind. The horse stood patient and calm despite the storm, as though it trusted its rider's judgment completely. "Hold on to your brother," Caleb told Sarah. "I've got the reins. You won't fall." Then he turned to Eliza and offered his hand. She took it, letting him pull her to her feet. His grip was warm and solid, the first steady thing she'd felt in weeks. "Stay close," he said. "The ground's going to try to take your feet." He wasn't wrong. The mud sucked at her boots with every step, and the wind shoved her sideways more than once. But Caleb kept one hand on the horse's bridle and the other ready to catch her when she stumbled, and somehow they made progress. The cabin appeared through the rain like a miracle. Small, but sturdy. Built from solid logs with a stone chimney and real glass in the windows. Light flickered inside, warm and golden. Caleb got the children down first, then pushed open the door. "Get inside. I'll see to the horse." Eliza ushered her children through the doorway and stopped, blinking in the sudden warmth. The cabin was simple but well kept. One large room with a wood stove radiating heat, a table and chairs, a narrow bed in the corner, shelves lined with supplies. Everything was clean, orderly, practical. The home of a man who lived alone but lived deliberately. "Mama, it's warm." Thomas's voice was full of wonder. "Take off your wet things," Eliza said, already peeling James out of his soaked shirt. "We need to get dry." There were blankets folded on a chest near the bed. She grabbed them, wrapping each child and settling them close to the stove. Steam rose from their clothes and hair as the heat began to work into their skin. The door opened, and Caleb came in, shaking water from his coat. He hung it on a peg by the door, removed his hat, and moved to the stove without a word. Within minutes, he had coffee brewing and was slicing bread from a loaf on the counter. "There's stew left from my dinner," he said, glancing at Eliza. "Not fancy, but it's hot." "You don't have to—" "I know." He ladled stew into bowls and brought them to the table. "But I'm going to anyway." The children ate like they were starving, because they were. Eliza tried to take small bites to show some restraint, but the warmth of the food in her belly nearly brought tears to her eyes. Caleb poured coffee for her, then took a seat at the table with his own cup. He didn't eat, just watched the storm through the window and let them have their silence. When the bowls were empty, Eliza finally spoke. "Thank you, Mr. Hayes." "Caleb's fine." "Caleb," she hesitated, "I'll pay you back. For the food, for the shelter. As soon as I find work." He turned to look at her then, his expression unreadable. "You got plans?" "I was hoping to find work at your ranch or in town. I can clean, cook, mend. I'm a hard worker." "Where's your husband?" The question was quiet, not unkind, but it still hit like a fist. "Dead. 3 years now." Caleb nodded slowly. "And you came all the way out here alone." "I didn't have a choice." He was quiet for a moment, his gaze moving to the children who were already starting to nod off in their blankets. "Ranch owner's wife could use help in the house," he said finally. "I'll put in a word." Hope flared in Eliza's chest, sharp and painful. "You'd do that?" "I would." He stood and moved to the bed, stripping off the quilt. "You and the young ones take the bed tonight. I'll sleep by the stove." "I can't take your bed." "You can and you will." His tone left no room for argument. "You've been sleeping on the ground for who knows how long. One night in a real bed won't kill you." Eliza opened her mouth to protest again, but exhaustion crashed over her all at once, so heavy she could barely keep her eyes open. She gathered her children and settled them into the bed, crawling in beside them. The mattress was thin, the pillow flat, but it felt like heaven. As she drifted towards sleep, she heard Caleb moving around the cabin, banking the fire, checking the door. The last thing she saw before her eyes closed was him sitting in a chair by the stove, his back straight, his eyes on the storm outside. Keeping watch, keeping them safe. When Eliza woke, the storm had passed. Morning light filtered through the windows, soft and clean. The world outside was washed new, the air fresh and cool. She could hear birds singing, the cheerful sound so at odds with the terror of the night before that it felt like waking into a different life. Her children were still asleep, curled together like puppies. She slipped out of bed carefully, not wanting to wake them, and found Caleb already up, frying eggs at the stove. "Morning," he said without turning around. "Good morning." She felt suddenly awkward, aware of how she must look, hair tangled, dress wrinkled, standing in a strange man's cabin. "I should check on our wagon." "Already did. It's gone." Her heart sank. "Gone?" "Washed away in the storm. Found pieces of it down by the creek." He plated the eggs and brought them to the table. "Your tent's gone too. Whatever you had out there, it's scattered or buried by now." Eliza sat down slowly, trying to process this. Everything she'd had left in the world, the few dishes, the spare clothes, Thomas's wooden horse that Aaron had carved, all of it gone. "I'm sorry," Caleb said quietly. She nodded, not trusting her voice. He poured her coffee and sat across from her. "The ranch house is about 2 miles from here. Mrs. Hayes is a decent woman, fair employer. If you want, I can take you there this morning. Introduce you proper." "Yes, please." The words came out hoarse. "You'll need something to wear. That dress won't make the right impression." He stood and went to a trunk in the corner, rummaging for a moment before pulling out a bundle of fabric. "These were my wife's. She passed 4 years ago. Never had the heart to get rid of her things, but I think she'd be glad to see them used." He held out a simple brown dress, well made and sturdy. Eliza took it with shaking hands. "I'll step outside while you change," Caleb said. "Take your time." When he'd gone, Eliza held the dress up to herself. It would be a little long, but otherwise it looked like it would fit. She changed quickly, her fingers fumbling with the buttons. The fabric was soft from years of wear, and it smelled faintly of lavender. When she opened the door, Caleb was standing by his horse, checking the saddle. He looked up as she approached, and something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe, or memory. "Fits well enough," he said. "Thank you, for everything." He nodded and gestured to the horse. "We'll ride double. The children can manage?" "They'll be fine." It took some maneuvering to get all of them settled, but eventually they were moving. Caleb in front, Eliza behind him with James in her lap, Sarah and Thomas clinging to her waist. The ride to the ranch house was quiet. The land rolled out in gentle swells, green from recent rain, dotted with cattle that raised their heads to watch them pass. In the distance, mountains rose blue and hazy against the sky. It was beautiful. Eliza had been too frightened and desperate to notice before, but now, in the calm morning light, she could see it. The vastness, the wildness, the promise of space to breathe. The Hayes Ranch came into view gradually. A large main house, several barns, a bunkhouse, corrals, and fenced pastures. It was prosperous, well-maintained, the kind of place that spoke of generations of hard work. Caleb rode straight to the main house and dismounted, then helped Eliza and the children down. "Wait here," he said, and disappeared inside. Eliza stood in the yard, acutely aware of the ranch hands pausing in their work to stare at her, of how out of place she must look. She smoothed her borrowed dress and told her children to stand up straight. The door opened and Caleb emerged with a woman who could only be Mrs. Hayes. She was perhaps 50, handsome rather than pretty, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense air about her. "Mrs. Moore," Caleb said. "This is Mrs. Catherine Hayes." "Ma'am?" Eliza bobbed a curtsy, feeling foolish even as she did it. Catherine Hayes looked her over with the kind of frank assessment that saw everything and judged accordingly. Then her gaze moved to the children, lingering on their thin faces and worn clothes. "Caleb tells me you're looking for work," she said. "Yes, ma'am. I can clean, cook, do laundry, whatever you need." "Can you read?" "Yes, ma'am, and write and do sums." "Good. My last housekeeper left to get married, and I've been managing on my own for 3 months. I'm tired of it." She glanced at Caleb. "You vouch for her character?" "I do." Catherine nodded. "Then we'll try you out. Room and board for you and the children, plus $4 a month. You'll work 6 days a week, Sundays off. Meals with the family. If it works out, we'll make it permanent." $4 a month. It wasn't much, but with room and board included, it was more than Eliza had dared hope for. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am." "Don't thank me yet. I expect hard work and honesty. You give me that, we'll get along fine." Catherine turned to Caleb. "Show them to the housekeeper's cottage. I'll expect Mrs. Moore to start after she's settled." "Yes, ma'am." The cottage was small, just 2 rooms, but it had a real floor, a real roof, and a small stove for heat. There was a bed frame that would fit 2, and Caleb promised to bring a mattress from the bunkhouse storage. After the tent, after the wagon, after sleeping on the ground, it looked like a palace. "I'll leave you to it," Caleb said, standing in the doorway. "If you need anything, my cabin's just past the north pasture. You remember the way?" "I do." Eliza met his eyes. "I don't know how to thank you." "No need." He settled his hat back on his head. "You would have done the same." She wasn't sure that was true. She wasn't sure she had that kind of courage to ride into a storm for strangers. But she nodded anyway. As Caleb walked away, Sarah tugged on Eliza's sleeve. "Mama, is this home now?" Eliza looked around the little cottage, at the solid walls and the clean windows and the space where her children could sleep without fear. "Yes, sweetheart," she said softly. "I think it might be." The first week passed in a blur of work. Eliza rose before dawn to start fires, prepare breakfast, and begin the endless cycle of cooking, cleaning, and laundry that kept a household running. Mrs. Hayes was exacting but fair, quick to point out mistakes, but equally quick to acknowledge good work. The family, Catherine, her husband Robert, and their 2 grown sons, treated her with polite distance, neither warm nor cold. Sarah and Thomas helped where they could, fetching water and gathering eggs from the chicken coop. James was too young to work, but he stayed close to Eliza, playing quietly in corners while she scrubbed floors and kneaded bread. At night, they returned to the cottage, exhausted but fed. Eliza would heat water for washing, mend their clothes by lamplight, and fall into bed with her children, too tired even to dream. She saw Caleb occasionally, usually at a distance, riding out to check fence lines, working with the horses, talking with the ranch hands. He always nodded when their eyes met, a small acknowledgement that felt oddly comforting. On Sunday, her first day off, Eliza woke to find a bundle on her doorstep. Fabric for new dresses, a bag of dried apples, and a carved wooden horse for James to replace the one he'd lost. There was no note, but she knew who'd left it. That afternoon, she walked to Caleb's cabin with a basket of biscuits she'd made from leftover flour. He was outside splitting wood, his shirt damp with sweat despite the cool air. "Thought you might be hungry," she said, holding out the basket. He set down the axe and wiped his hands on his trousers. "Didn't have to do that." "You didn't have to leave gifts on my doorstep either." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, the first she'd seen from him. Fair point. They sat on the porch steps, and he ate 3 biscuits in silence while she watched the clouds move across the sky. "Why did you help me?" she asked finally. "That night in the storm. You didn't know me. You didn't owe me anything." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. "My wife and I, we tried for years to have children. Never happened. Then she got sick, and that was that." He stared out at the horizon. "When I saw your tent, saw those young ones, I guess I just thought somebody should look out for them." "You're a good man, Caleb Hayes." He shook his head. "Just a man who knows what it's like to need help and not have it." They sat together until the sun started to set, not talking much, just being. And for the first time since Aaron died, Eliza felt something shift inside her. Not happiness, not yet, but the possibility of it. The sense that maybe, just maybe, the worst was behind them. As she walked back to the cottage with her children, the last light painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, she allowed herself to hope. It was a small hope, fragile as new grass after a fire. But it was real. And that was enough. The rhythm of ranch life became familiar faster than Eliza expected. She learned the particular way Mrs. Hayes liked her tea, the exact temperature for Mr. Hayes's shaving water, the spots in the main house that gathered dust no matter how often she cleaned them. Her hands, already rough from years of hard work, grew harder still from lye soap and scrub brushes, but she didn't mind. Hard work had a purpose now, a destination beyond mere survival. 3 weeks after the storm, she was hanging laundry in the yard when one of the ranch hands approached, a young man named Pete, who always tipped his hat too enthusiastically when he saw her. "Mrs. Moore, Caleb asked me to bring you this." He held out a small crate. "Said you might could use it." Inside were 3 laying hens already settling into their new container with the calm of creatures who'd been handled gently. He said what? Eliza blinked at the chickens. "Said you and the young ones might like fresh eggs. There's feed in the barn, and I built a small coop behind your cottage yesterday evening. Caleb's orders." Pete grinned. "He's thoughtful like that. Quiet about it, though." After Pete left, Eliza stood in the yard with the crate of chickens, something warm and complicated expanding in her chest. The eggs alone would make a difference. Protein for growing children, something to trade or sell if needed. But more than that, it was the attention behind the gift. Caleb had noticed what she needed before she'd even thought to ask. That evening, she walked to his cabin again, this time with nothing but her presence as an offering. He was on the porch, oiling a saddle in the fading light. He looked up as she approached, his hand stilling on the leather. "The chickens," she said without preamble. "You have to stop." His eyebrows rose slightly. "Stop?" "Giving me things. The fabric, the food, now livestock. I can't repay you, Caleb." "Didn't ask you to." "That's exactly the problem." She crossed her arms, though the gesture felt false even as she made it. "I won't be in debt to anyone. I've worked too hard to stand on my own feet." Caleb set down the saddle and stood, wiping his hands on a rag. "Is that what you think this is? Putting you in debt? What else would it be?" He was quiet for a moment, his gray eyes steady on hers. "When my wife died, folks around here helped me through it. brought food, sat with me, made sure I didn't forget to eat or sleep. I didn't ask for it, and I sure as hell couldn't repay it. But they didn't want repayment. They just saw someone who needed help, and they helped. He paused. That's what neighbors do. That's what decent people do. Eliza felt her throat tighten. I'm not used to that. I know. His voice softened. But maybe you could get used to it. She looked away, blinking against the sting in her eyes. The chickens are appreciated. The children were thrilled. Good. That's all I wanted. They stood in silence for a moment, the evening air cool and pine-scented around them. Somewhere in the distance, a cow lowed. Closer by, crickets were starting their nightly chorus. Would you like to stay for supper? Caleb asked. Nothing fancy, just stew. I should get back to the children. Bring them. I'll put extra wood on the fire. She should have said no. Should have maintained proper distance between herself and this man who kept finding ways past her defenses. But the truth was, she didn't want to say no. The cottage was lonely in the evenings, and the children's chatter, while beloved, couldn't fill the space where adult conversation used to be. All right, she said. We'll come. The look that crossed Caleb's face, surprise followed by something warmer, made her stomach flip in a way she hadn't felt in years. By the time she returned with Sarah, Thomas, and James, Caleb had the stew hot and the table set with mismatched bowls that had clearly belonged to his wife. He'd even put out a jar of preserves and a loaf of bread that looked store-bought, a luxury on a foreman's wages. The children settled in quickly, Thomas already chattering about the chickens, James climbing onto a chair with the confidence of a child who'd decided this place was safe. Sarah was quieter, watching Caleb with the careful assessment of a girl who'd learned to judge adults by their actions rather than their words. Mr. Hayes, Sarah said as he ladled stew into her bowl, do you live here all alone? Sarah, Eliza started, but Caleb shook his head. It's all right. Yes, I do. Just me. Don't you get lonely? Sometimes. He glanced at Eliza briefly. But I've got the horses and the work keeps me busy, and lately I've had good company now and then. Sarah seemed satisfied with this answer. She took a bite of stew and her eyes widened. This is really good. Your mama's a better cook than me, but I manage. Mama makes the best biscuits in the whole world, James announced, his mouth full. James, manners. Eliza nudged him gently. Caleb smiled. I believe it. Had some of those biscuits myself. The meal passed in easy conversation, the kind that happened when people were comfortable with each other. Caleb asked the children about their days, listened to their answers with genuine interest, and told stories about the ranch horses that had them laughing. Eliza found herself relaxing, the constant tension she carried in her shoulders easing degree by degree. After supper, while Eliza washed the dishes, Caleb showed Thomas how to whittle, producing a small knife and a piece of soft pine. Sarah sat nearby with a book Caleb had pulled from a shelf, a collection of folk tales with illustrations that made her gasp with delight. James fell asleep in Eliza's lap, his head heavy against her shoulder. I should get them back, Eliza said, as the darkness outside grew complete. I'll walk you. You don't have to. I know. Caleb was already reaching for his coat. But I will anyway. The walk back to the cottage was short, but Caleb stretched it out, pointing out constellations to Sarah and Thomas, letting them set the pace. When they reached the door, the children said their goodnights and hurried inside, eager for their beds. Eliza lingered on the threshold. Thank you for tonight. They needed that. What about you? The question caught her off guard. What about me? Did you need it too? She wanted to deflect, to say something light and dismissive. But Caleb's eyes held hers with an honesty that demanded the same in return. Yes, she said quietly. I did. He nodded, as if she'd confirmed something he already knew. You're welcome here any time, Eliza. You and the children both. It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the sound of it in his low voice did something to her pulse. Good night, Caleb. Good night. She watched him walk away, his figure gradually swallowed by darkness, and wondered when exactly she'd started looking forward to seeing him. The answer, she suspected, was the moment he'd ridden into that storm. Over the following weeks, a pattern emerged. Eliza would work her days at the main house, and several evenings a week she and the children would walk to Caleb's cabin for supper. It became natural, expected, something the children looked forward to, and Eliza found herself planning around. Mrs. Hayes noticed, of course. Nothing happened on her ranch without her knowledge. "Caleb Hayes is a good man," she said one afternoon while Eliza was kneading bread. The comment came from nowhere, unprompted by any conversation they'd been having. Eliza kept her eyes on the dough. "Yes, ma'am." "Lost his wife to consumption. Took it hard, but he didn't let it make him bitter. That says something about a man's character." "Yes, ma'am." Catherine Hayes studied her for a long moment. "He's been alone too long. A man like that needs family." Eliza felt heat creep up her neck. "Mrs. Hayes, I'm not suggesting anything improper. I'm simply observing." Catherine's tone was matter of fact. "You're a widow with children who need a father. He's a widower with a good position and a kind heart. If something were to develop between you, I wouldn't object. In fact, I'd consider it sensible." Eliza's hands stilled in the dough. The directness of it startled her, even though Catherine Hayes had never been anything but direct. "I'm not looking for a husband," Eliza said carefully. "Maybe not. But sometimes the best things are the ones we're not looking for." Catherine moved to the window, gazing out at the ranch yard. "My Robert and we married for practical reasons. His father needed the alliance with my family. I needed security. We didn't love each other at first, but we built something real over time. Love that's grown from respect and partnership that lasts longer than the kind that burns hot and fast." Eliza didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. That night, lying in bed with her children asleep beside her, she let herself think about what Catherine had said, about Caleb, about the future. The truth was, she did feel something for him. It wasn't the wild, consuming love she'd had for Aaron. They'd been young, reckless with their hearts. This was different, quieter, built on small kindnesses and steady presence. On the way he listened when she talked, the way he made her children laugh, the way he never expected anything from her but accepted everything she chose to give. It scared her, this feeling, because caring for someone meant risking loss, and she'd already lost so much. But it also thrilled her, in a way she'd thought she'd never feel again. The next Sunday, Caleb invited them on a picnic. He'd discovered a spot by the creek, he said, where the cottonwoods made shade and the water was shallow enough for the children to wade safely. They packed a basket with bread, cheese, apples, and the last of Catherine's berry preserves. The walk took half an hour, following a path that wound through tall grass and wildflowers. The children ran ahead, their laughter carrying back on the breeze. The spot was as beautiful as Caleb had promised, a bend in the creek where the water ran clear over smooth stones, cottonwoods spreading their branches overhead, and a stretch of soft grass perfect for spreading a blanket. While the children waited and explored, Eliza and Caleb sat on the blanket watching. "They're happy," Caleb observed. "They are. I haven't seen them this carefree since before Aaron died." "Tell me about him, your husband." Eliza plucked a blade of grass, twirling it between her fingers. "He was a carpenter, good with his hands, always building something. We married young. I was 17, he was 19. Everyone said we were too young, too poor, too foolish. But we were happy." She paused, remembering. "He died in an accident. A wall collapsed while he was working on a barn. Killed him instantly." "I'm sorry." "So am I." She looked at him. "What about your wife?" "Clara. We had 15 years together. She was strong, stubborn, had opinions about everything." His voice held affection even through the grief. "The consumption took her slow. Months of watching her fade, knowing I couldn't stop it. By the end, she weighed less than a child. That must have been unbearable." "It was. But she made me promise I wouldn't spend the rest of my life mourning, said I was too good a man to waste." He met Eliza's eyes. "Took me 4 years to even consider she might be right." Chicked. The implication hung in the air between them, delicate and charged. "Caleb." "Mama, look!" Thomas came running up, dripping wet, holding a smooth river stone. "Can I keep it?" The moment broke, but the feeling lingered. They stayed until the sun began to lower, then walked back as the light turned golden. The children were tired, moving slowly, so Caleb carried James on his shoulders, while Sarah and Thomas held Eliza's hands. At the cottage, while Eliza got the children ready for bed, Caleb waited on the porch. When she came back out, he was sitting on the steps, looking at the stars beginning to appear. She sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "Eliza," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something." Her heart jumped. "All right. I care about you, about your children, more than is probably wise given how short a time we've known each other." He turned to face her. "I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know, so you can tell me if I should step back." Eliza looked at this man who'd saved her from a storm, who'd given her work and shelter and kindness, who'd made her children laugh and made her feel like a woman again instead of just a survivor. "Don't step back," she whispered. The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise. He reached for her hand and she let him take it, his calloused palm warm against hers. They sat like that for a long time, not talking, just being together under the emerging stars. When he finally stood to leave, he squeezed her hand gently. "Good night, Eliza." "Good night." She watched him disappear into the darkness, her hand still tingling from his touch, and knew with absolute certainty that her life had just shifted onto a new path. The question was whether she had the courage to walk it. The answer came 2 weeks later, in the worst possible way. Eliza was in the main house helping Catherine prepare for a dinner party when Robert Hayes came in looking grim. "Catherine, I need to speak with you, privately." Something in his tone made Eliza's stomach drop. Catherine followed her husband into his study, and Eliza tried to focus on polishing silver, but her hands shook. When Catherine emerged, her face was pale. "Mrs. Moore, sit down." "What's wrong?" "There's been a development. The bank in Cheyenne that holds our mortgage has been sold to a larger institution. The new owners are calling in several loans, including ours. We have 60 days to pay in full, or—" She trailed off. "Or what?" "Or they'll foreclose. The ranch will be sold at auction." Eliza felt the world tilt. "But what about your position here? Your work?" "If the ranch sells, the new owner will bring in their own foreman. Robert's already received inquiries from other ranches, but they're all far from here. Montana, even Oregon." Catherine's voice was steady, but her eyes held worry. "We'll have to let most of the staff go within the month. I'm sorry, Mrs. Moore. I'll give you excellent references, but—" "I understand." But she didn't, not really. She couldn't process it. Just when she'd found stability, found hope, found something that might become love, it was all being torn away. That evening, she couldn't bring herself to go to Caleb's cabin. Instead, she sat on her porch while the children slept, trying to figure out what to do next. He found her there, worry etched in his face. "Eliza, you didn't come. I thought—" He saw her expression and sat beside her. "What happened?" She told him everything, her voice flat with shock. When she finished, Caleb was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "I've been offered a position, ranch in Montana, north of Helena. Good pay, permanent foreman position with a percentage of profits. You're leaving." "I don't want to." He took her hand. "But I don't have a choice. Without this job, I've got nothing." "I know." They sat in silence, the weight of it crushing. "Come with me," Caleb said suddenly. Eliza's head snapped up. "What?" "Come with me. You and the children. We could—" He stopped, seeming to struggle for words. "Marry me, Eliza. Come to Montana as my wife." Her heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear. "Caleb, we've known each other less than 2 months." "I know. But I also know I don't want to face the rest of my life without you in it. I know your children need a father, and I'd be honored to be that for them. I know we're good together." He cupped her face in his hand. "I'm not asking you to love me, just to trust me, to give us a chance." Eliza closed her eyes, tears spilling over. Everything in her wanted to say yes, but fear held her tongue. "I can't," she whispered. "I'm sorry, Caleb. I just can't." She felt him go still, then slowly pull away. "All right," he said, his voice rough. "I understand." He stood and walked away, and Eliza sat alone in the darkness, wondering if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life. The days that followed felt like walking through waist-deep water. Everything took more effort than it should have. Eliza moved through her work at the main house with mechanical precision. her hands performing tasks while her mind circled endlessly around that moment on the porch. Caleb's face when she'd said no. The sound of his footsteps fading into darkness. She didn't see him for 3 days. Then on the 4th morning, she looked out the kitchen window, and there he was in the ranch yard, talking with Robert Hayes, his hat in his hands, his shoulders set in a way that spoke of decisions made and accepted. Catherine came to stand beside her. He's leaving day after tomorrow, taking the Montana position. Eliza's chest tightened. That's good. He deserves security. Do you love him? The question was so direct it stole Eliza's breath. She turned to face Catherine, who was watching her with the shrewd eyes of a woman who'd lived long enough to recognize foolishness when she saw it. I don't know, Eliza said honestly. Maybe. Or maybe I could, given time. Then why did you refuse him? Because I've already lost one husband. I can't. Her voice broke. I can't survive losing another. Catherine's expression softened, just slightly. So instead you'll lose him by choice and call it wisdom. That's not fair. No, it's not, but it's true. Catherine moved back to the counter where she'd been rolling out pie dough. Fear is a poor compass, Mrs. Moore. It only ever points you toward what you've already lost, never toward what you might gain. Eliza had no answer to that, so she returned to her work, scrubbing pots with more force than necessary, trying not to think about Montana, about Caleb building a life there without her, about her children asking why they didn't see Mr. Hayes anymore. That evening, Sarah was the one who finally broke through the careful walls Eliza had built around the subject. Is Mr. Hayes angry with us? She asked as Eliza tucked her into bed. No, sweetheart. Why would you think that? He hasn't come to see us, and you look sad all the time now, the way you did after Papa died. Sarah's eyes, so much older than 9 years should allow, held steady on her mother's face. Did we do something wrong? Oh, baby, no. Eliza gathered her daughter close. You didn't do anything wrong. Mr. Hayes is leaving. He got a job on a different ranch, far away. Can't we go with him? The simple question, asked with such innocent logic, nearly undid her. It's not that simple. Why not? Because... Eliza stopped, realizing she didn't have a good answer. Because I'm afraid felt too heavy to put on a child's shoulders. Because I'm a coward was too honest. Because we have our life here. But we're leaving here anyway. Mrs. Hayes told me. She said the ranch is closing and we'll have to find somewhere else to live. Sarah's voice grew smaller. I thought maybe we could go where Mr. Hayes is going. He makes you smile. And he's kind to us. And I think Papa would have liked him. Eliza felt tears burning behind her eyes. You really think so? Papa always said we should take care of each other. Maybe Mr. Hayes could help us do that. And we could help him too because he's lonely. Sarah paused. Don't you want to be happy, Mama? The question hung in the air like a prayer. Yes, Eliza whispered. I do. Then why won't you let yourself be? There was no good answer to that either. Eliza kissed her daughter's forehead and fled to the porch, where she stood in the cool night air trying to catch her breath. She was still there when she heard footsteps approaching. Her heart leaped, but it wasn't Caleb. It was Robert Hayes, carrying a lantern. Mrs. Moore, forgive the intrusion. Mr. Hayes. Is something wrong? That depends on your perspective. He set the lantern on the porch rail. Caleb came to me this afternoon, asked me to look out for you and the children after he leaves, help you find a position somewhere safe. Robert's weathered face was thoughtful in the lamplight. That's the kind of man he is, leaving, probably broken-hearted and still thinking about your welfare. Eliza wrapped her arms around herself. I know what kind of man he is. Do you? Because I've known Caleb Hayes for 15 years, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you, not even Clara, and he loved her dearly. Robert leaned against the porch post. When Clara died, we all thought that was it for him, thought he'd just work himself to dust and blow away. But then you came along, and suddenly he had light in his eyes again, purpose beyond just getting through another day. Mr. Hayes, I appreciate I'm not finished. His tone was gentle but firm. My wife told me what you said to her, about not being able to survive another loss, and I understand that, Mrs. Moore, I truly do. But here's what I know about loss. It comes whether we risk our hearts or not. The only choice we get is whether we've lived enough to make the grief worthwhile. He picked up his lantern. Caleb leaves tomorrow at first light. The Montana job starts in 2 weeks, so he's got time to travel slow if he needs to. I'm telling you this because I think you deserve to know your options before they disappear. After he left, Eliza sat on the porch steps and let herself cry. Not the quiet, restrained tears she'd allowed herself since Aaron's death, but great wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. She cried for Aaron, gone too soon, for the home she'd lost, the life she'd tried to build, for her children, who deserved better than a mother paralyzed by fear, and for Caleb, who'd offered her everything and asked for nothing but a chance. When the tears finally stopped, she felt emptied out, but also, strangely, lighter. Sarah's words echoed in her mind. "Don't you want to be happy, Mama?" The answer was yes, and maybe it was time to be brave enough to reach for it. She rose before dawn, her decision made. The children were still sleeping, so she left them in the care of Mrs. Hayes with a hasty explanation and ran toward Caleb's cabin, her skirts hiked up, her hair streaming loose. The sky was just beginning to lighten, that gray pre-dawn glow that turned the world into something uncertain and new. She could see smoke rising from Caleb's chimney, which meant he was awake, probably making coffee before the journey. She was breathless when she reached his door, her hand raised to knock when it swung open. Caleb stood there, half-dressed, his shirt unbuttoned, suspenders hanging loose. His eyes widened when he saw her. "Eliza?" "Ask me again," she gasped out. "What?" "Ask me again, what you asked on the port." "Ask me again and I'll give you a different answer." Something blazed to life in his eyes. He stepped out onto the porch, closing the distance between them. "Eliza Moore, will you marry me? Will you come to Montana and build a life with me?" "Yes." The word came out fierce and certain. "Yes, I'll marry you." He caught her face in his hands and kissed her, and it was nothing like the chaste kiss she'd shared with Aaron at their wedding. This was a kiss between two people who'd known loss and loneliness, who understood the value of what they were choosing. It was gentle and hungry all at once, a promise and a question and an answer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb pressed his forehead to hers. "You're sure? I won't hold you to this if you're not sure." "I'm terrified," she admitted, "but I'm sure. My daughter asked me last night if I wanted to be happy. The answer is yes. And you make me happy, Caleb Hayes." "When?" His voice was rough with emotion. "When will you marry me?" "Today. Now. Before I lose my nerve." She laughed, giddy with the enormity of what she was doing. "Is there a preacher in town?" "There is. Reverend Thompson. He'd marry us if we asked." Caleb's hand slid to her waist, holding her steady. "You want to get married today and leave for Montana tomorrow?" "I want to start our life together as soon as possible. Unless, do you need time? To prepare, to—" He silenced her with another kiss. "I've been preparing for you my whole life, Eliza. I just didn't know it until I saw you in that storm." They rode to town together, Caleb on his horse with Eliza seated in front of him, her back against his chest, his arms secure around her. The children were awake when they stopped to collect them, and Sarah's face when Eliza explained what was happening, pure joy, erased any lingering doubts. "Mr. Hayes is going to be our papa?" Thomas asked, his eyes wide. "That's all right with you," Caleb said seriously. "Yes." James threw himself at Caleb, who caught him and swung him up. Then that settled. Caleb looked at Eliza over the boy's head, his expression soft. "We're a family now." The words settled into her bones like warmth. Reverend Thompson was surprised but willing, especially after Caleb explained the circumstances. The wedding took place in the small church with Mrs. Hayes and 2 ranch hands as witnesses. Eliza wore her best dress, still the brown one that had belonged to Clara, which felt somehow right, like a blessing from the woman who'd loved Caleb first. There were no flowers, no music, no elaborate ceremony, just simple vows spoken in steady voices, Caleb's hand warm around hers, and the knowledge that she was choosing this, choosing him, choosing hope over fear. When Reverend Thompson pronounced them husband and wife, Caleb kissed her softly, mindful of the children watching, but his eyes promised more for later, and Eliza felt heat bloom in her cheeks. They spent their wedding day preparing to leave. The Hayes family helped, donating supplies they could spare, helping pack what few possessions Eliza had accumulated. Catherine pulled her aside while the men were loading the wagon Caleb had borrowed. "You're doing the right thing," Catherine said. "I can see it in your eyes. You're alive again. I'm terrified I'll mess this up." "You will sometimes. So will he. That's marriage." Catherine squeezed her hand. "But you're both good people who want to make this work. That's more than most couples start with." As the sun began to set, they gathered for a simple supper at the main house, a wedding feast of sorts, though no one called it that. Robert Hayes made a toast with well water, wishing them health and happiness. The ranch hands added their congratulations, clearly pleased for Caleb, who'd always been respected among them. That night in Caleb's cabin, their cabin now, Eliza put the children to bed in the loft that Caleb had prepared, adding blankets and pillows to make it comfortable. When she came back down the ladder, Caleb was banking the fire, moving slowly, almost carefully. "They settled all right?" he asked. "Already asleep. It's been a big day." "For all of us." He turned to face her. "Eliza, I know this is sudden. We don't have to... if you need time to..." She crossed to him and placed her hand on his chest, feeling his heart beating hard beneath her palm. "I'm your wife, and I want to be your wife in every way." The kiss that followed was different from the ones earlier, deeper, more urgent. Caleb's hands tangled in her hair, and she pressed closer, learning the feel of him, the taste. When he lifted her and carried her to the bed, she went willingly, her own desire surprising her with its intensity. He was gentle, patient, attentive in ways that made her feel cherished. They learned each other slowly, and when they finally came together, it felt like coming home. Afterward, lying in his arms with her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat slow, Eliza felt something she hadn't felt in 3 years. Safe. Not just physically safe, though that too, but safe in a deeper way, safe to be vulnerable, to hope, to love again, without holding part of herself back. "What are you thinking?" Caleb's voice rumbled under her ear. "That I'm glad I ran to your cabin this morning." She felt him smile. "So am I." "Are you nervous? About Montana?" "A little. New place, new people, new responsibilities." He stroked her hair absently. "But I've got you now. That makes everything easier." "We've got each other," she corrected. "That's what marriage is, isn't it? Sharing the burdens. And the joys." "Those too." She lifted her head to look at him. "I need you to know something. I didn't marry you just for security, or for the children. I married you because I'm falling in love with you, Caleb Hayes. Maybe I already have." His eyes went bright. "I love you too, Eliza. Think I started the night of the storm, when you looked at me like I was crazy for riding out in that weather." She laughed. "You were crazy." "Probably, but it led me to you, so I'd do it again in a heartbeat." They fell asleep tangled together, and Eliza's last thought before sleep claimed her was that she'd made the right choice. For herself, for her children, for the future she was building. Morning came too soon. They rose in the dark, moving quietly so as not to wake the children yet. Caleb made coffee while Eliza packed the last of their belongings. The wagon was loaded, the horse hitched, everything ready for the journey. When the children woke, groggy but excited, Eliza dressed them in their warmest clothes and fed them a quick breakfast. Sarah kept looking between her and Caleb with a satisfied smile, as if she'd personally arranged the marriage. The sun was just breaking the horizon when they were ready to leave. The Hayes family came out to see them off, along with several ranch hands who'd become friends over the past months. "Write to us," Catherine said, embracing Eliza. "Let us know you've arrived safely." "I will. And thank you for everything." Robert shook Caleb's hand, then pulled him into a brief hug. "Take care of them." "With my life," Caleb promised. They climbed onto the wagon, Caleb driving, Eliza beside him, the children in the back among the supplies. As Caleb urged the horse forward, Eliza looked back at the ranch one last time. It had been a refuge when she'd needed it most. But it wasn't her future. Her future was sitting beside her, steady and strong, ready to face whatever came next. The journey to Montana would take weeks. They'd travel through plains and mountains, through weather fair and foul, camping under stars and sheltering in towns when they could. It would be hard, maybe even dangerous at times, but they'd face it together. Caleb reached over and took her hand, lacing their fingers together on the wagon seat. Eliza squeezed back, feeling the calluses on his palm, the warmth of his skin. "Ready?" he asked. She looked at her children, already pointing excitedly at a hawk circling overhead, looked at the road stretching out before them, leading toward a new life, looked at the man beside her, who'd offered her everything and asked only for her trust in return. "Ready?" she said. And she was. The first few days of travel were easier than Eliza had expected. The weather held clear and warm, the road was well maintained, and Caleb knew the route, having traveled it several times before. They made good progress, stopping each evening to make camp, cook supper, and settle the children for sleep. The nights were Eliza's favorite part. After the children were asleep in the wagon bed, she and Caleb would sit by the fire, talking quietly or simply being together in comfortable silence. Sometimes he'd pull her close, and they'd watch the stars wheel overhead, and Eliza would think about how strange and wonderful it was that her life had turned out this way. On the fourth day, they reached the town of Rawlins, a bustling place with a hotel, several stores, and a telegraph office. Caleb suggested they spend the night in real beds, and Eliza agreed gratefully, her back aching from days of sitting on the hard wagon seat. They checked into the hotel and cleaned up, then went to the general store for supplies. While Caleb was discussing flower prices with the shopkeeper, Eliza wandered the aisles with the children, letting them marvel at the goods on display. That's when she overheard two women talking near the fabric counter. "Did you hear about the Hayes Ranch down in Wyoming? Foreclosed last week. Whole family lost everything." Eliza's heart clenched. So it had happened. The Hayes family, kind, decent people who'd helped her when she had nothing, had lost their home. "Shame," the other woman said. "But that's the risk of ranching. One bad year and the bank comes calling." Eliza moved closer to Caleb, touching his arm. When he looked down, she whispered what she'd heard. His face went grim. "I knew it was coming, but I'd hoped—" He stopped, shaking his head. Nothing to be done about it now. But Eliza couldn't shake the guilt. The Hayes family had lost their home, and here she was, starting a new life, happy. It felt wrong, somehow. That night, lying in the hotel bed with Caleb's arms around her, she voiced her feelings. "They helped us, and now they're suffering, and we can't do anything to help them back." "We can pray for them," Caleb said quietly. "And we can live well, build something good. That's what they'd want for us. Is it enough? It has to be." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "We can't save everyone, Eliza. Sometimes all we can do is save ourselves and hope others find their own way forward." She knew he was right, but it still hurt. They left Rawlins the next morning and continued north. The terrain grew more rugged, the road less traveled. They passed through small settlements, saw antelope and wild horses, crossed rivers swollen with spring melt. On the 8th day, they encountered trouble. They'd stopped for the midday meal at a place where the road followed a river. While Eliza was unpacking food, Caleb watering the horse, a group of riders approached, 5 men, rough-looking, with the kind of eyes that assessed everything for value. Caleb saw them and moved casually to the wagon, putting himself between the riders and his family. "Afternoon," the lead rider said. He was a big man with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow. "Heading north?" "We are," Caleb replied, his tone neutral. "Long way to go alone. Dangerous country up ahead." "We'll manage." The man's gaze slid to Eliza, lingered in a way that made her skin crawl. "Pretty wife you got there. And young ones, too." Caleb's posture shifted, subtle but unmistakable. "Is there something you need?" "Just being neighborly. Thought maybe you could spare some supplies. We've had a run of bad luck." "I can spare some flour and coffee. Nothing more." The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. "That's mighty kind, but I think you got more than that in your wagon." The other riders had spread out, casual but deliberate, forming a loose circle. Eliza's heart began to pound. She pulled the children closer, her mind racing through options. Caleb's hand moved to his belt, where Eliza knew he kept a knife. His voice when he spoke was calm, almost conversational. "I'm going to give you some flour and coffee, like I said. Then you're going to ride on. We don't want trouble." "Neither do we," the scarred man said. "But sometimes trouble finds you anyway." For a long moment, nobody moved. Eliza could hear her own pulse in her ears, could feel Sarah trembling against her side. Then a new voice cut through the tension. "That's far enough, boys." Everyone turned. An older man on a gray horse had ridden up from the north, a rifle resting casually across his saddle. He looked to be in his 60s, weathered and lean, with the bearing of someone who'd seen his share of trouble and wasn't impressed by it. "This doesn't concern you, old man," the scarred rider said. "Does now." The older man's eyes were ice cold. "I know you, Taggart, know what you are, and I'm telling you to ride on before this gets ugly." Taggart's hand moved toward his gun, but the older man's rifle came up faster, steady, and aimed. "Don't," the old man said softly. "I'm too old to wrestle, but I can still shoot straight." The standoff held for 3 heartbeats. Then Taggart spat into the dirt and jerked his head at his companions. "Come on, ain't worth it." They rode off, but not before Taggart shot one last look at Caleb that promised this wasn't over. When they were out of sight, the older man lowered his rifle and tipped his hat to Eliza. "Ma'am, name's Henry Dawson. Sorry you had to see that." "Thank you," Caleb said, moving forward to shake his hand. "Caleb Hayes, this is my wife Eliza and our children." "Hayes? You the new foreman at the Circle M?" "I am. How did you know?" "Small country up here. Word travels." Henry dismounted, moving like someone whose joints ached. "I run a small spread about 10 miles north of the Circle M. Been expecting you to come through." "Will those men come back?" Eliza asked, her voice not quite steady. "Not likely. Taggart's a coward who only fights when the odds favor him, but you'll want to be careful till you reach the ranch." Henry looked at the son's position. "If you're willing, you can follow me. I'll see you safe to the Circle M boundary. Got business with the foreman anyway." Caleb glanced at Eliza, a question in his eyes. She nodded. "We'd appreciate that," Caleb said. They traveled the rest of the day in Henry's company, and Eliza found herself relaxing degree by degree. The old man was a steady presence, clearly well-versed in the country, pointing out landmarks and sharing information about their new home. "The Circle M's a good outfit," he told them as they rode. "Owner's name is Marcus Wheeler. Fair man, hard worker. Lost his foreman last month to pneumonia, been struggling to manage alone." He glanced at Caleb. "You got experience with cattle?" 15 years worth. "Good. You'll need it. The herd's about 2,000 head, and spring branding's coming up." As the sun began to set, they crested a rise, and Henry pointed ahead. "There she is. The Circle M." Eliza's breath caught. The ranch spread out in a valley, bigger than the Hayes operation, with extensive buildings, multiple corrals, and pastures that seemed to stretch forever. Mountains rose in the distance, snow-capped and majestic. It was beautiful, intimidating. Home. They rode down as twilight deepened, and Eliza felt Caleb's hand find hers, squeezing gently. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. That was all she needed to know. The ranch house came into full view as they descended into the valley, lamplight glowing warm in the windows. Eliza could make out figures moving in the yard, ranch hands finishing evening chores, the shapes of horses in the corrals. Everything looked solid, established, real, in a way that made her previous life feel like something that had happened to someone else. Marcus Wheeler met them in the yard, a man in his early 50s with silver threading through dark hair and the kind of presence that commanded respect without demanding it. He shook Caleb's hand firmly, his grip testing, then nodded when Caleb met it with equal strength. "You made good time," Marcus said. "Expected you wouldn't arrive for another few days at least." "We had an incentive to keep moving," Caleb replied, his hand settling on Eliza's back. "This is my wife, Eliza, and our children, Sarah, Thomas, and James." Marcus's eyebrows rose slightly at the word wife, but his expression remained pleasant. "Ma'am, children, welcome to the Circle M." He turned to Henry Dawson. "Obliged to you for seeing them in safe, Henry." "Ran into Taggart and his boys near Crooked River," Henry said, and Marcus's face darkened. "They give you trouble?" "Started to. I persuaded them otherwise." Marcus muttered something under his breath that sounded like a curse. "I'll send word to the sheriff. Those men have been a problem for months now." He looked at Caleb. "You armed?" "Knife and a rifle. No handgun." "We'll fix that tomorrow." Can't have my foreman riding around defenseless, not with his family to protect. Marcus gestured toward a cabin set apart from the bunkhouse. That's the foreman's quarters. It's bigger than what you're probably used to. 3 rooms, good stove, solid roof. Wife and I had it built when our son was foreman, before he moved to Denver. You'll find it furnished with the basics. Relief washed through Eliza. 3 rooms meant space for the children, privacy for her and Caleb. It meant they wouldn't be cramped or constantly on top of each other. That's generous, Caleb said. It's practical. Man does better work when his family's comfortable. Marcus pulled out a pocket watch, checked it, snapped it shut. It's late. Get yourself settled tonight, and we'll talk business in the morning. My wife Ruth will come by after breakfast to meet you proper, Mrs. Hayes. The use of her new name sent a small thrill through Eliza. Mrs. Hayes. She was someone's wife again, but this time it felt different, not just a role she'd fallen into out of love and youth, but a choice she'd made with open eyes. Henry Dawson tipped his hat to them. I'll be seeing you folks around. Mrs. Hayes, if you need anything and your husband's out with the herd, my place is due north about 10 miles. My wife Emma would be glad for the company. Thank you, Mr. Dawson. After the men left, Caleb unhitched the horse and got their belongings from the wagon while Eliza herded the children toward the cabin. A ranch hand, a young man who introduced himself as Pete, different from the Pete back in Wyoming, had already lit lamps inside and started a fire in the stove. The cabin was indeed bigger than Caleb's place back in Wyoming. The main room held a table, chairs, a small settee near the fireplace, and the stove. One bedroom opened off to the left, another smaller one to the right. The furniture was simple, but well made, and everything was blessedly clean. Mama, there's real beds, Thomas called from the smaller bedroom, his voice full of wonder. Eliza went to look and found 2 narrow beds with real mattresses, blankets folded at the foot of each. The children could share this room, which meant she and Caleb would have the larger bedroom to themselves. Heat crept into her cheeks at the thought. They spent the evening unpacking what little they had, making the cabin into something that felt like theirs. The children were exhausted from travel and went to bed without protest. When Eliza came out of their room after tucking them in, she found Caleb standing at the window, looking out at the ranch. "What are you thinking?" she asked, moving to stand beside him. "That this is real, that we actually made it." He turned to face her, his expression serious. "Eliza, I need you to know, I'm going to work hard here, harder than I've ever worked. I want to prove to Marcus Wheeler that hiring me was the right choice. That means long days, sometimes dangerous work. I know. And I need you to know that no matter how tired I am, how hard the day's been, I'm always going to come home to you, always going to put this family first." His hands framed her face. "You and these children are the reason I'm doing any of this." She kissed him then, pouring everything she couldn't quite say into it, her gratitude, her hope, her growing love. When they finally made it to their bedroom, she went into his arms with the certainty that she'd made the right choice. Morning came with the sound of cattle lowing and men's voices carrying across the yard. Eliza woke to find Caleb already gone, a note on his pillow saying he'd meet her at the main house for breakfast. She dressed quickly, woke the children, and got them presentable before walking across the yard. The main house was larger than she'd realized in the dark, built of solid logs with a wide porch and real glass windows. She knocked, and the door swung open almost immediately to reveal a woman close to her own age, with kind eyes and flour on her apron. "You must be Eliza. I'm Ruth Wheeler. Come in. Come in. Breakfast is nearly ready." The kitchen was warm and spacious, filled with the smells of coffee, bacon, and fresh biscuits. Marcus and Caleb were already at the table, deep in conversation about cattle numbers and spring plans. They looked up as Eliza and the children entered. "Mrs. Hayes," Marcus said, standing, "please sit. Ruth's made enough to feed half the territory." Breakfast was a lively affair. Ruth was talkative in the way of someone who'd been isolated too long and was starved for female company. She asked Eliza about the journey, admired the children, and within 15 minutes had extracted Eliza's entire life story with such genuine interest that Eliza found herself sharing things she hadn't meant to. "A widow with 3 children," Ruth said thoughtfully, refilling Eliza's coffee. "That must have been terribly difficult." "It was, but I managed. More than managed, from what I can see. Those children are well behaved and clearly loved. Ruth glanced at Caleb. And you managed to catch yourself a good man in the bargain. Caleb actually blushed, which made Marcus laugh. After breakfast, Marcus took Caleb out to tour the ranch properly, while Ruth enlisted Eliza's help with the day's baking. The children played in the yard under the watchful eye of Pete, who seemed to have appointed himself their guardian. As Eliza kneaded bread dough, Ruth talked about the ranch, the neighbors, the challenges of living so far from town. "It's not an easy life," she said frankly. "Winters are hard, summers can be brutal. The work never stops. But there's something about this place that gets into your blood. The space, the freedom, the feeling that you're building something real." "I felt that a little back in Wyoming," Eliza admitted. "But we were always just surviving, never quite getting ahead." "Well, if Caleb's half as good as Marcus thinks he is, you won't have that problem here. The foreman gets a percentage of the profits, not just wages. Do well, and you'll do very well indeed." The possibility of actual prosperity, of security beyond just scraping by, was almost too much to hope for. Eliza kept her focus on the bread dough, afraid to let herself believe it. Over the next few weeks, they settled into the rhythms of ranch life. Caleb was gone from before dawn until after dark most days, throwing himself into the work with the intensity of a man who had everything to prove. He came home exhausted, smelling of horses and sweat and leather, but he always had time to sit with the children before bed, to listen to their day, to make them laugh. And at night, he had time for Eliza. They learned each other slowly, tenderly, building intimacy not just in the physical joining, but in the quiet conversations afterward, the sharing of hopes and fears and dreams. Eliza took on work helping Ruth with the household, grateful for both the extra income and the companionship. Ruth became not just an employer, but a friend, someone who understood the particular challenges of ranch life and offered advice without judgment. The children thrived. Sarah lost the pinched, worried look that had become habitual, her face filling out as regular meals became the norm. Thomas grew bold, exploring the ranch with Pete as his guide, learning about horses and cattle. James attached himself to Caleb with the devotion of a child who'd finally found a father. It was almost perfect. Almost. The trouble came 6 weeks after their arrival. Caleb had ridden out with a crew to check fence lines in the northern pasture when riders approached the ranch. 5 men, and Eliza's blood went cold when she recognized the scarred face of Taggart. She was in the yard hanging laundry, the children playing nearby. Ruth was in the house. The ranch hands were scattered across the property, too far to help quickly. Taggart reined in his horse and smiled, the expression ugly. "Well now, the pretty wife all alone." Eliza straightened, forcing her voice steady. "My husband will be back soon." "Will he?" "Funny thing, we saw him headed toward the North Ridge. That's a good 3 hours' ride from here." Taggart dismounted, and his men did the same. "Seems like poor planning, leaving you unprotected." "I'm not unprotected. There are ranch hands. Scattered all over. We checked." He took a step closer. "See, we've been watching, learning the routines. And today seemed like a good day to finish our conversation from the road." Sarah had gone still, her hand gripping Thomas's. James was behind them, his eyes wide with fear. Eliza stepped between her children and the men, her mind racing. "What do you want?" "Supplies, money, maybe a little hospitality." Taggart's eyes crawled over her. "You're new here, so maybe you don't understand how things work. This is rough country. Accidents happen, people disappear, unless they're smart enough to cooperate." The door to the main house opened, and Ruth stepped out with a shotgun cradled in her arms. Her face was calm, but her eyes were flint. "You've got 5 seconds to get back on those horses," she said clearly, "or I start shooting." Taggart laughed. "Old woman with a gun. You even know how to use that?" Ruth's response was to pump the shotgun, the sound sharp and unmistakable. "Try me." For a moment, no one moved. Then one of Taggart's men said nervously, "Maybe we should just go." "Shut up," Taggart snapped. But his eyes had shifted, calculating odds. That's when the sound of hoofbeats carried across the yard, multiple riders coming fast. Marcus Wheeler appeared first, followed by Caleb and 4 ranch hands, all armed. Caleb's face when he saw Taggart near his family was terrible. He dismounted while his horse was still moving, his hand going to the gun Marcus had given him weeks ago. "You've got 3 seconds," Caleb said, his voice deadly quiet. 3 seconds to get on those horses and ride, or I will kill you where you stand. Marcus moved up beside him, his own rifle ready. And if he doesn't, I will. You're trespassing, Taggart. Threatening women and children on my land. The other ranch hands had fanned out, weapons drawn, faces hard. Taggart was outnumbered and outgunned, and he knew it. This ain't over, he said, but he was already backing toward his horse. Yes, it is, Marcus replied. Because if I see you on my land again, I'll shoot you for a trespasser, and the law will back me. And I'll make sure every ranch within 100 miles knows your face. You won't find work, shelter, or mercy anywhere in this territory. Taggart mounted up, his men scrambling to follow. They rode off at a gallop, and Eliza sagged with relief. Caleb was at her side instantly, his hands running over her, checking for injury. Did he touch you? Did any of them? No, we're fine. Ruth came out with the shotgun before her voice broke. He pulled her against his chest, holding her tight while she shook. Over her head, she heard Marcus speaking to Ruth. You did good, wife. I'm getting too old for this excitement, Ruth said, but her voice trembled. That evening, after the children were in bed, after Marcus and Caleb had posted extra guards and made plans to ride to the sheriff in the morning, Eliza sat on the porch of their cabin with Caleb's arm around her. I thought we'd left this kind of danger behind, she said quietly. So did I. His jaw was tight. I should have been here. You were working. You can't be everywhere at once. I should have anticipated this. Taggart's been a problem for months, according to Marcus. I should have... She turned to face him, placing her hand over his mouth. Stop. You can't protect us from everything. What matters is we're safe. Ruth handled it. Marcus came back in time, and now the sheriff will be involved. What if next time? Then we'll handle next time when it comes. Together. She leaned her forehead against his. I didn't marry you because I thought life would be easy. I married you because I knew we could face the hard parts together. He kissed her, gentle and thorough, then pulled her close again. They sat like that for a long time, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. The next morning, Caleb and Marcus rode to town with statements for the sheriff. They returned that evening with news that Taggart and his men had warrants out for robbery in 3 counties. The sheriff had put together a posse and was hunting them. It's out of our hands now, Marcus said, but I want extra men on watch rotation until they're caught. The heightened security continued for 2 weeks. Then word came that Taggart's gang had been caught trying to rob a freight wagon near the territorial border. There'd been a shootout. 2 of the gang members were dead, including Taggart. The rest were in custody awaiting trial. The relief Eliza felt was profound. 1 threat eliminated. 1 less thing to fear. Life settled back into routine, but with a new awareness of how fragile security could be. Eliza found herself watching the horizon more, keeping the children closer. But gradually, as weeks passed without incident, the tension eased. Spring turned to early summer. The ranch prospered under Caleb's management. He had a gift for it, Marcus said, a way of seeing what needed doing before problems developed. The cattle were healthy, the hands worked hard under his fair leadership, and profits were up. True to his word, Marcus gave Caleb his percentage. It wasn't a fortune, but it was more money than Eliza had seen in years. She stared at the bills Caleb laid on their table, hardly able to believe it. This is ours? She asked. Ours, he confirmed, and there'll be more come fall after we sell the steers. For the first time in 3 years, Eliza could think beyond immediate survival. She could plan. She could hope. She used some of the money to buy fabric for new dresses for herself and Sarah, proper trousers and shirts for the boys. She bought books for the children, knowing education mattered. She even bought a few luxuries, real coffee, sugar, a mirror for their bedroom. But mostly, she saved it, because she'd learned the hard way that security could vanish in an instant, and she wanted something set aside for emergencies. One evening in late June, Ruth invited them to supper at the main house. It was a lovely meal with roast beef and fresh vegetables from Ruth's garden. Afterward, over coffee, Marcus cleared his throat in a way that signaled something important. Caleb, Eliza, there's something Ruth and I want to discuss with you. Eliza exchanged a glance with Caleb, suddenly nervous. We're getting older, Marcus continued, and we've been thinking about the future. Our son in Denver has no interest in ranching. He's made that clear. which means eventually this place will need new ownership. Marcus, Ruth interjected gently, you're dancing around it. Marcus smiled. You're right. Here it is plain. We want to offer you a partnership, Caleb. You put in 10% of the ranch value, you get 20% ownership and full decision-making authority alongside me. When Ruth and I pass on, you'll have first option to buy the rest at a fair price. Eliza's heart hammered. A partnership, ownership, the kind of security she'd never dreamed possible. Caleb was very still. That's extraordinarily generous. It's good business, Marcus corrected. You're the best foreman I've had in 20 years. You work like you own the place already. Might as well make it official. And frankly, it would ease my mind knowing the Circle M will be in good hands when I can't run it anymore. How much are we talking? For the 10%? Marcus named a figure that made Eliza's stomach drop. It was more than they had, more than they could save in years. But Marcus wasn't finished. I know that's steep, so here's my proposal. You pay what you can now, and the rest comes out of your profit percentage over the next 5 years. No interest, just a straight payment plan. Caleb looked at Eliza, a question in his eyes. This was a decision that would bind them to this place, to this life, for the foreseeable future. But when she thought about it, really thought about it, she couldn't imagine anything she wanted more. A home, stability, a future they were building together. She nodded. Caleb turned back to Marcus and extended his hand. You've got yourself a partner. The handshake that followed felt like a promise, like the final piece of something falling into place. That night, lying in bed with Caleb's arms around her, Eliza thought about how far they'd come. From a tent collapsing in a storm to part ownership of a prosperous ranch. From desperate survival to genuine hope. Are you happy? Caleb asked, his voice soft in the darkness. She thought about it, really thought about it. About her children, safe and fed and growing. About this man who'd offered her everything and asked only for trust. About the life they were building together, one day at a time. Yes, she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. I'm happy. He kissed her temple. Good. Because I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you stay that way. And she believed him. The partnership changed everything and nothing all at once. Caleb still rose before dawn and worked until sunset, but now there was a different quality to his labor. The satisfaction of a man building something that would belong to his children someday. Eliza saw it in the way he walked the property, assessing fence lines and pastures with an owner's eye, making decisions about improvements that would pay off years down the line. They paid what they could toward the partnership's stake, watching their savings account shrink with a mixture of anxiety and pride. It was terrifying to commit so much, but it was also the smartest investment they could make in their future. Summer deepened into the kind of heat that made the mountains shimmer in the distance. The work was relentless. Haying, fence repairs, preparing for the fall cattle drive. But there were good moments, too. Sunday afternoons, when the whole ranch family would gather for dinner, the sound of laughter carrying across the yard. Evenings when Caleb would take the children riding, teaching them to sit a horse properly, to read the land, to understand the rhythms of ranch life. Sarah turned 10 in August, and Ruth helped Eliza bake a cake, the first birthday celebration they'd managed since Aaron died. The girl's face when she saw the candles, when everyone sang to her, nearly broke Eliza's heart with its joy. Make a wish, sweetheart, Eliza said. Sarah closed her eyes, her expression solemn with the weight of the moment, then blew out all 10 candles in one breath. When she opened her eyes, she was looking at Caleb. What did you wish for? Thomas asked. Can't tell, or it won't come true, Sarah replied primly. But later, when she hugged Caleb goodnight, Eliza heard her whisper, Thank you for being our papa. Caleb's arms tightened around the girl, and when he looked up, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. That night, after the children were asleep, Eliza found him on the porch, staring out at the dark shape of the mountains. You all right? She asked, settling beside him. I keep thinking about Clara, he said quietly, about how much she wanted children, how we tried for so many years. And now I have 3 who call me Papa, and it feels like... He stopped, struggling for words. Like, you got the family you were meant to have, just not the way you expected. Something like that. He pulled her close. Does it bother you that I think about her sometimes? No, she was part of your life. I wouldn't want you to forget her. Eliza paused, choosing her words carefully. I think about Aaron, too. Wonder what he'd think of all this. Of you. And I think he'd be glad. Glad the children have a father again. Glad I'm not alone. You think he'd approve of me? I think he'd have liked you. You're both good men who put family first. She turned to look at him. And I think Clara would have liked me too. We both love you after all. Caleb kissed her then, slow and sweet, and Eliza felt the rightness of it settle into her bones. This was her life now. This man, these children, this ranch, and she wouldn't trade it for anything. In September, a letter arrived from Wyoming. Eliza recognized Catherine Hayes's handwriting and opened it with trembling fingers. The news was mixed. The ranch had indeed been foreclosed and sold at auction, but Robert had managed to secure a foreman position at a larger operation 2 territories over. The pay was less, the work harder, but they were managing. Catherine wrote with her usual brisk practicality, asking after Eliza and the children, expressing satisfaction that Caleb had found good employment. But it was the postscript that made Eliza's throat tighten. I told you that you were doing the right thing, marrying him. I hope by now you know I was correct. Build something good, Eliza. You've earned it. Eliza showed the letter to Caleb that evening. He read it in silence, then folded it carefully. They helped us when we had nothing, he said. I'd like to help them back if we can. What did you have in mind? A loan. Enough to help them get settled properly, buy some livestock of their own if they want. We can't give much, but something. Eliza thought about their carefully hoarded savings, the partnership payments they still owed Marcus. But she also thought about Catherine's kindness, Robert's fairness, the way they'd given her a chance when she was desperate. Yes, she said. Let's do it. They sent $50, a significant sum, but one they could spare. The letter that came back from Catherine was shorter than usual, but the gratitude in every line was unmistakable. You didn't have to do this, she wrote, but we're grateful beyond words. You're good people, both of you. As fall settled in, the pace of work intensified. The cattle drive to the rail station was a massive undertaking, 2 weeks of moving 2,000 head of cattle across rough country, camping under stars, dealing with everything from river crossings to stampedes. Caleb had to go, leaving Eliza and the children at the ranch. She tried not to worry, but the nights felt empty without him, and every day that passed without word scraped at her nerves. Ruth noticed, of course. He'll be fine. He's got good men with him, and Marcus knows what he's doing. I know, it's just... Eliza couldn't finish the sentence. Just that she'd lost one husband already. Just that happiness felt fragile, like something that could shatter at any moment. That's the price of loving someone, Ruth said gently. The fear of losing them. But you can't let fear steal your joy. The words stayed with Eliza. She'd spent so much of her life afraid of poverty, of loss, of taking risks. But fear hadn't protected her from anything. It had just made her smaller. When Caleb returned 3 weeks later, dusty and exhausted but unharmed, she threw herself into his arms with an abandon that made the ranch hands whistle and cheer. She didn't care. She kissed him thoroughly, right there in the yard, and he kissed her back with equal fervor. Miss me? He asked when they finally broke apart. Terribly. She touched his face, needing the reality of him. Don't ever be gone that long again. Can't promise that, but I can promise I'll always come home to you. The cattle sale brought in excellent profits. Marcus was jubilant, and Caleb's percentage was enough to make a significant dent in what they owed for the partnership. At this rate, they'd own their stake outright within 3 years instead of 5. As winter approached, they settled into the quieter rhythms of cold weather ranch life. There was still work, animals to feed, ice to break on water troughs, equipment to repair, but the frantic pace of summer eased. Eliza spent more time in the main house with Ruth, learning to preserve food, to make soap, to handle the 1,000 small tasks that kept a household running. The older woman became something like a mother to her, filling a space Eliza hadn't realized was empty. On a cold December afternoon while they were baking bread, Ruth said casually, You know, Marcus and I have been talking about making this arrangement more permanent. Eliza looked up from kneading dough. More permanent how? We're not getting any younger, and we trust you and Caleb more than anyone we know." Ruth's hands moved steadily, shaping loaves. "We're thinking of updating our wills, leaving everything to you and Caleb outright, with a provision for our son, of course, but the ranch itself would go to you." "Ruth, we couldn't possibly—" "You could, and you should. You and Caleb have poured your hearts into this place. You've made it your home, made us your family, and those children—" Ruth's voice softened. "Marcus and I always wanted grandchildren. Your three are as close as we'll get." Eliza set down her dough, her hands trembling. "You don't know what this means to us." "I think I do." Ruth smiled. "You were lost when you came here, and now you're found. That's worth preserving." That evening, Eliza told Caleb about the conversation. He sat very still, processing it. "They want to leave us the ranch," he said finally. "Yes, that's—" He shook his head, seeming overwhelmed. "I came here just looking for work, and now we're talking about owning one of the finest ranches in the territory. Are you scared?" "Terrified." He looked at her. "But also more certain than I've ever been about anything. This is what I want, Eliza. This life, with you, building something that will outlast us." "Then we'll do it together." He pulled her into his lap, holding her close. "How did I get so lucky?" "We both got lucky. That storm brought us together." "Best storm of my life," he murmured against her hair. Christmas came, their first as a complete family. They cut a small pine from the property and decorated it with strings of popcorn and paper ornaments the children made. Ruth and Marcus joined them for dinner in their cabin, and the small space rang with laughter and warmth. Caleb gave each child a carefully chosen gift: a new doll for Sarah, a pocket knife for Thomas, a wooden horse for James that he'd carved himself during long winter evenings. For Eliza, he presented a delicate silver locket. "It was my mother's," he said as she opened it. "I want you to have it." Inside were two small photographs, one of Caleb and Clara, young and happy, and one space left empty. "For us," Caleb said quietly, "when we go to town and can get a photograph made. Past and present, both valued." Eliza's eyes filled with tears. The gesture spoke to everything she loved about this man, his honoring of what had been while embracing what was now. She fastened the locket around her neck and kissed him. "I didn't get you anything nearly so fine," she admitted. "You gave me a family. That's the finest gift I could ever receive." Winter deepened, snow blanketing the valley in white silence. The ranch work continued, but at a slower pace, giving them time together they hadn't had during the frantic growing season. Long evenings by the fire, Caleb teaching the boys to play chess while Sarah read aloud from one of her books. Quiet mornings when Eliza and Caleb would steal a few moments alone before the children woke, talking about plans for spring, for the future, for the life they were building. In February, Eliza realized she was pregnant. The knowledge hit her with a mixture of joy and terror. She'd had 3 difficult pregnancies with Aaron, and she wasn't young anymore. 32 was considered old for childbearing, but when she told Caleb, his face transformed with such pure happiness that her fears receded. "A baby," he breathed, his hand settling gently on her still flat stomach. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" "Happy doesn't begin to cover it." He kissed her with infinite tenderness. "Are you scared?" "A little. But mostly I'm glad. This family isn't complete without a piece of both of us in it." They told the children that evening. Sarah squealed and immediately started making plans for how she'd help with the baby. Thomas looked uncertain until Caleb assured him that a new baby wouldn't change how much they loved him. James, at 6, was mostly interested in whether the baby would be able to play with him. "Not right away," Eliza said, laughing. "Babies are very small at first, but eventually, yes." That seemed to satisfy him. Ruth and Marcus were delighted, already planning additions to the cabin to make room for a nursery. The whole ranch seemed to buzz with the news, and Eliza found herself the recipient of advice from every ranch hand who'd ever known a pregnant woman. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through spring. Eliza was tired and occasionally sick, but nothing like the debilitating illness she'd experienced with her other children. Caleb treated her like she was made of glass, constantly worrying, until she finally had to tell him to stop fussing. "I've done this before," she reminded him. "I know what I'm doing." "Doesn't mean I can't worry." "Worry quietly then, And stop trying to carry everything for me. I'm pregnant, not incapable." He grinned. "Yes, ma'am." Summer arrived with its usual rush of work, but Caleb hired extra hands to pick up Eliza's slack as her pregnancy advanced. By August, she was hugely pregnant and uncomfortable, ready to be done. The baby came in early September, 3 weeks before expected, in the middle of the night. Caleb rode for the doctor in town while Ruth stayed with Eliza, calm and capable. By the time the doctor arrived, it was almost over, a quick labor compared to her others, and mercifully uncomplicated. The baby was a girl, small but healthy, with a powerful set of lungs and a shock of dark hair like Caleb's. When Caleb finally got to hold his daughter, his face was a study in wonder. "She's perfect," he whispered. "What should we name her?" Eliza asked. "I was thinking, if you're amenable, Clara Ruth, after my wife and Mrs. Hayes." Eliza's throat tightened. "It's perfect, Clara Ruth Hayes." The older children crowded in to see their new sister, Sarah immediately claiming the role of protective big sister, the boys peering at the baby with curious fascination. "She's so tiny," Thomas said. "You were that tiny once," Eliza told him. "Really? Really? And you're my babies always, even though you're growing up." Over the following weeks, the household adjusted to life with an infant. Claire was a relatively easy baby, sleeping well and eating enthusiastically. Caleb was besotted, spending every free moment holding her, talking to her, showing her the ranch that would someday be partially hers. Watching him with the baby, with all the children, Eliza felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. This was what she dreamed of in those dark days after Aaron died. Not just survival, but a real life. Love. Family. Home. One evening in October, after all the children were asleep, she and Caleb sat on the porch watching the sun set behind the mountains. "Do you ever think about that storm?" she asked. "The night we met?" "All the time." He shifted baby Clara in his arms. "I think about how close I came to not riding out, how I almost stayed in the cabin, told myself it wasn't my business." "What made you go?" "Honestly, I saw your tent from the ridge and thought about how scared those children must be. Couldn't live with myself if I'd ignored it." He looked at her. "Best decision I ever made." "Mine too, accepting your help." "You almost didn't." "I know. I was so determined to handle everything myself, to not need anyone." She leaned against his shoulder. "I'm glad I was desperate enough to accept. I'm glad I was stubborn enough to insist." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "We're good together, Eliza. Better than I ever thought I'd get to be again." "Me too." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell and stars emerged. The ranch sounds settled around them, cattle lowing in the distance, horses moving in the corral, the murmur of voices from the bunkhouse. Marcus and Ruth had officially updated their will that summer, making their intentions legal and binding. Someday, this would all belong to Caleb and Eliza, to their children. The thought was still overwhelming, but also deeply right. As winter approached again, they prepared for the coming cold with the confidence of people who knew what they were doing now. The root cellar was full, the firewood stacked, the cattle brought to lower pastures. They were ready. On the first Sunday of December, the whole extended ranch family gathered at the main house for dinner. Marcus and Ruth, Caleb and Eliza and the children, even a few of the long-term ranch hands who'd become like family. The table groaned under the weight of food, and the room rang with laughter and conversation. As Eliza looked around the table, she realized this was the family she'd never known she could have. Not just Caleb and the children, but this whole network of people who cared for each other, who'd chosen to be family even without blood ties. After dinner, while the others were still talking, Marcus stood and tapped his glass for attention. "I just want to say a few words," he began. "This ranch has been in my family for 3 generations. I've poured my life into it, and for a long time I worried about what would happen to it when Ruth and I were gone. Our son made his choice to live a different life, and that's fine. But it left a question about the future." He looked at Caleb and Eliza. "You two have answered that question. In the 1.5 years you've been here, you've become the son and daughter-in-law Ruth and I never had. You've loved this place like your own, worked like partners, and brought life and joy back to this house. Your children have become our grandchildren in every way that matters." Ruth was dabbing at her eyes with her napkin. So I want to say thank you, Marcus continued. Thank you for choosing us, for staying, for building something that will last long after we're gone. This ranch is in good hands. More than that, it's in hands that will cherish it the way we have. Caleb stood, clearly moved. Marcus, Ruth, we're the ones who should be thanking you. You took a chance on a stranger and his newly acquired family. You gave us not just work, but a home, a future. We'll honor that trust for the rest of our lives. The room erupted in agreement, glasses raised in a toast to family, to the future, to the life they were all building together. Later, as they walked back to their cabin through the cold night air, the children tired and happy, baby Clara sleeping in Caleb's arms, Eliza thought about how far they'd come. From a tent collapsing in a storm to this, a family, a home, a legacy. "What are you thinking?" Caleb asked, shifting Clara to free one arm for Eliza. "That I'm grateful. For all of it. Even the hard parts that led us here. Even losing Aaron?" She considered that. "I'll always grieve him. Always wish he'd lived to see the children grow up. But I also know that he'd want me to be happy, to live fully, and I am." She looked up at her husband. "I'm happier than I ever thought I could be again." "Good." He kissed her forehead. "Because I plan to spend the rest of my life keeping you that way." They reached their cabin, warm light spilling from the windows, smoke curling from the chimney. Inside was everything that mattered. Their children, their life, their love. Eliza paused at the threshold, looking back at the ranch spread out in the moonlight. The main house where Marcus and Ruth were probably still cleaning up from dinner. The bunkhouse where good men slept before another day's work. The barns and corrals that represented their livelihood. The land stretching away to the mountains, beautiful and harsh and home. A storm had brought her here. Desperation. Fear, the kind of need that stripped away pride and forced hard choices. But what had kept her here was love. The kind that grew slowly, built on respect and partnership and shared struggle. The kind that didn't burn out but deepened with time. She'd been so afraid of risking her heart again, so certain that loving meant losing. But Caleb had shown her a different truth, that the risk was worth it. That love didn't make you weaker, it made you stronger. That family wasn't just what you were born into, but what you chose to build. "Ready?" Caleb asked, waiting at the door. Eliza took one last look at the stars wheeling overhead, bright and constant in the vast Montana sky, then followed her husband inside. Yes, she was ready. Ready for whatever came next, the good and the hard, the joyful and the challenging. Ready to face it all with this man by her side, with their children growing up strong and loved, with a home that was truly theirs. The storm that had threatened to destroy her had instead delivered her to exactly where she was meant to be. And that was more than survival. That was grace.